she felt for the cervix and she said, well, there's a little bit of a cervix left over the head. And some might call that a cervical lip, right? But she
Hmm.
is so wise and so gentle and kind. And she, after talking to so many people, cervical lips are oftentimes the most painful thing to like get over the head, right?
Hmm.
And so I was thinking, oh no, I'm embracing and kind of clenching for this pain. She said she just all she did was place her fingers on the lip and say, "You're melting away. Baby is coming down. It's going away. It's melting away." She just touched it and told it what to do. And
Hmm.
in that moment, the baby's head dropped through my pelvis. My water
Wow.
broke. I had felt like this kick, and my water exploded everywhere. I jumped out of bed. It was so dramatic. I jumped out of bed and I just felt her fall to my perineum. And I just sat there hanging over my bed, hand on her head, thinking, how did that just happen in a matter of 2 minutes?
Hey, you're listening to Births at Home, the podcast, with me, Esmeralda, as your host. I am a mama of three, fellow home birther, doula, and birth keeper. I am completely obsessed with birth, more specifically, home birth. And this is the podcast where women come to share their home birth stories along with the journey that led them down the path to home birth. Whether you're pregnant, planning a home birth with your first or fourth baby, or even is just someone who is a complete birth nerd like me, this is the podcast for you. Let's get right into this week's home birth story.
Hi, I'm Aly McClain. I am a wife of 11 years, got four beautiful children. I am a registered nurse, a birth doula, and educator, and I'm also the podcast host of Peaceful Homebirth. So, birth has been in my life. Well, obviously since the beginning of my life, but birth has been a very important part of my life and my ministry and mission since I had a very traumatic birth with my first baby. So, no,
Mhm.
we'll get into that. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here today. So, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Very excited to have you on and hear about your journey. You did mention that you had a kind of traumatic first birth. So, did you want to touch on that a little bit and maybe explain how that changed your journey?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of lessons learned through that birth. And looking back, I know birth trauma can be tricky to navigate. And I've done some training into being a trauma-informed professional because of that experience and how there really wasn't people around me at that time who knew how to handle my trauma. I didn't know how to handle that. And birth trauma just can feel a little tricky because, of course, we're so happy that our baby is here and healthy, and I'm so in love, but at the same time, I felt so broken. So, to kind of sum up that story, and the lessons learned through that, I learned that there are consequences to every decision. And for me being a nurse, I inherently trusted the medical system to tell me what to do. So instead
Hmm.
of taking that radical responsibility of decision making, I gave that away. And through that experience, I had the cascade of interventions, and my water broke one night, rushed straight to the hospital, and contractions weren't starting. So we did our best to walk and do all the things we could do, but because my water had broken, I didn't know anything. I had taken a hospital birth course. Looking back,
Hmm.
there's so many other things I probably would have done, but that hospital course basically set me up to follow directions and be a good girl, and that's what I did. And what it got me was really a lot of trauma.
Hmm.
And so I was started on Pitocin. The Pitocin was very intense for me, so I got the IV meds. IV meds didn't touch what I was feeling, so I got the epidural and finally was able to sleep. But my body did not handle Pitocin really well, and so
Mm.
the contractions were very, very intense on me and baby. And my baby's heart rate went down to 20 beats per minute, which is
Wow.
so incredibly scary. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember looking over, kind of rolling over and looking at the monitor when they sounded the alarm and all of these people rushed in, and it was kind of an out of body experience. I turned around. I knew it was chaos, but all I could focus in was that monitor and seeing her heartbeat be in the 20s and thinking, what's happening? Like, why is
Yeah.
this happening? And so they came in, they gave me a shot of terbutaline to stop my contractions. And I remember the very first time I saw my doctor, that whole labor was at that moment. She had not seen
Mm.
me at all during the 18 hours I was at the hospital until that moment. And she said, if this happens again, you're going to have a C-section. And I thought, that's not what I want. I've never wanted that. And no other options were given. So,
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes later, it happened again, and they rolled me back to the OR.
Mm.
And baby was born. And I wasn't able to hold her for a couple of hours. Her blood sugar was low. She was cold. She was tiny. She was 5 pounds, 10 ounces. And I just remember feeling again that out of body, that kind of dissociation in the moment because I was under
Mm-hmm.
such duress that my body was like, you're in danger. Let's kind of separate you from that situation. And so it took me a while to kind of come back into myself. And when I did, I suffered with severe postpartum depression and anxiety that first year. It took me about 2 weeks to really believe that she was even my baby. I had
Mm-hmm.
convinced myself I was having a boy. And so when they had pulled her out and she was a girl, I was shocked. And because I was in that moment of dissociation, I didn't really understand, like, oh, that's her. So it took
Mm-hmm.
me a while to come back to reality. And that it was a terrible way to enter motherhood. And um, through that experience, I learned what doulas were. I
Mm-hmm.
learned what childbirth education was. And actually, knew from the moment I left the hospital that one, that was a bad experience. But then 2 weeks later, when we went to the doctor to have my follow up on my incision, I asked the doctor, why did I have to have a C-section? Well, she didn't
Mm-hmm.
even remember why she had cut me open 2 weeks prior. So she had to step out of the room, look at my chart. She came back in and she said, well, we wouldn't have known this unless we did the C-section, but your pelvis is too small. You'll never be able to have a baby vaginally. And in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, I was devastated, but at the same time, I'm like, this can't be right. There was something in my heart and in my spirit that was like, let's look into that more. So on the way home from that appointment, I remember thinking there has to be a different way.
Mm.
And this is not going to be my story. I'm not going to go through that again.
Yeah.
And on the way home is when I learned about ICANN, the International Cesarean Awareness Network. Learned about
Mm-hmm.
ICANN, I learned about doulas, and I said, well, I'm not going back to the hospital because that's where I experienced trauma. So let's look for a birth center. Well, there was no birth centers that would take a VBAC. So
Mm-hmm.
that left my only option as a home birth. And at that time, I knew nobody who had
Mm-hmm.
home births. But I hid that away in my heart and I just made it through that first year postpartum. And when we were ready, and I did a lot of healing during that time as well. Um, and when we were ready for my second pregnancy, that's when so many options came my way. And I know after talking to so many women, they're like, I dream about having a home birth, but I can't it's like they can't find people, they can't find midwives, they don't have anybody around them. I'm like, it's just not the time right now. Oftentimes I have
Hmm.
people coming to me before they're even pregnant and they're like, I don't even know how to plan for home birth. Or I'm like, you don't have to right now.
Hmm.
Just just embrace where you're at, and when the time comes, that's when all the resources you're gonna need start to appear. And I've seen
Hmm.
that time and time again. So that was my first introduction into birth and motherhood. So,
Yeah, definitely. It's super unfortunate that that happened to you, but it's not something that is uncommon. Also unfortunate. It happens to so many women, and it's so sad to hear that type of story over and over again, that the interventions just kept happening and kept happening, that cascade that happens. And yeah, a lot of women are left with trauma. So it's really sad to hear that you had to go through all of that. But I am glad that it did lead you down the path that it did. And you didn't have to have this idea in your head of, oh, I can't have any more babies, so I'm not going to have any more babies. Or I can only have C-sections now. And so now I'm only going to have that route and that option. So I am glad that it was able to lead you down a different journey than that.
yeah. And, it actually gave me some sort of comfort when I learned about the cascade of interventions because it gave
Hmm.
me proof when I didn't experience it for myself. I didn't experience a positive story for myself, but because I was able to hear other people's stories who have been through the cascade of interventions, and then on the other side, they were able to have a healing and redemptive birth. To me,
Hmm.
that was enough proof that I needed to continue on because there was no physical proof right in front of me that I was capable, but I drew off of other people's stories. If they
Hmm.
can do it, I can do it too. And even with the small pelvis thing, that is so many women are being told their body isn't
Hmm.
good enough, like it's not fit enough, it's not whatever
Yeah.
enough. And some women choose to accept that lie, and accepting that lie will change outcomes. I
Hmm.
chose to reject that lie, and from that rejection of a lie came the most beautiful redemptive birth I could ever ask, think, or imagine. So,
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. And so going into your second, which was your first home birth, what was the journey like of finding different options? Because you said they kind of just came to you. So what was that like?
yeah, so I live in a state where it's illegal. We're the last state in the United States where certified nurse midwives, it's a felony for them to attend home birth. So
Mm.
everybody thinks, well, home birth is illegal. And that's not true. Home birth is legal for anybody to do. It's just illegal for a certified nurse midwife to attend. So there was a lot of navigating and finding support. And there was a part of me that's looking back, I'm extremely thankful
Mm.
because I ended up with the most hands-off, trusting support that I needed. And it wasn't medical. I think I had so much medical trauma that a certified
Mm.
nurse midwife may not have been the best person to support me. Now,
Mhm.
there's all sorts of different kinds, but at that point, I just was hoping and praying that somebody would come along to just attend me and not
Mhm.
control me. And so when I got pregnant, we had gone over to dinner at one of my husband's friend's house, and I learned that she had had a home birth. She was the first
Mm.
person I had ever met who had had a home birth, and she said it was wonderful. And so I just kept taking the next step. And so I reached out to the lady who had attended her, and she came over for an interview. My husband was very hesitant. And I mean, I had my own reservations, but I knew that if I made the same decisions I had last time, including the
Mhm.
environment, that I would end up likely with the same outcome.
Yeah.
So I had to make radically different decisions to change the outcome that I wanted.
Hmm.
So she came over for this interview, and it was in that interview where things just became very clear. This was the path that we were supposed to take. But being a nurse and having nurses in my family, we were going to keep our mouth shut
Hmm.
about the fact that we were home birthing. Part of it was I was still pretty raw in the feelings of trauma. And so I knew I could not defend my decision necessarily in a healthy way. And I didn't
Hmm.
want to have to be in that place of defending. I
Yeah.
just wanted to be in the place of healing and enjoying my pregnancy and optimism, right? I didn't want to have to battle off people's opinions and fear stories and all of that. So I we didn't tell anybody. We maybe told a handful of really close people who were very supportive of our decision. And that's where I learned a lot about mindset. So this was so fascinating to me. I actually love business. And so I listen to a lot of business podcasts
Hmm.
and started learning about neuroscience and neuroplasticity and how your brain can literally rewire itself. And during that time, I had taken a trauma-informed professionals class and I learned about PTSD and learned how nutrition can actually start to heal your brain.
Hmm.
And it is that journey to me was made everything that I had experienced in the past worth it because I knew
Hmm.
these were the tools that if every woman had, they would be so much better off. And I would
Hmm.
have never found these tools if I wouldn't have gone through a traumatic birth. So,
Yeah.
I learned through this time that, yeah, you may still experience fear. Fear is not necessarily the enemy. Fear is a
Hmm.
normal emotion that triggers us to be safe. But it's when fear controls your decisions that it can be harmful. So
Hmm.
I had decided to do co-care with a provider. And mostly because I was still kind of juggling in between the medical system and home birth. And I was still in this place of I can't quite decide. Like I know I want a home birth, but I want the safety net of the
Yeah.
medical system. And so at 18 weeks, I went in for an anatomy scan and it showed placenta previa. And I remember him telling me, well, this is like if this placenta previa stays, your uterus or your placenta is right laying on top of its its anterior. So we'd have to cut through your placenta and all this. And he started going into such great detail about what my C-section would look like. And
Yeah.
I was so incredibly triggered. And all of these feelings of fear came in. And I remember leaving feeling absolutely devastated, like, well, maybe this just is my future, right? Maybe
Hmm.
that last doctor was right, and I am just destined to have C-sections the rest of my life. And I remember calling my midwife and sobbing, like just breaking down, sobbing, and
Hmm.
telling her I have placenta previa and I'm gonna have to have a C-section, and just really releasing all of these emotions. And I remember what she said to me changed my life forever. I'd never heard this before, but I remember the calm. And she just said, Aly, one thing I've learned is to never make decisions out of fear. And in that moment, it was like a light bulb went off. And I realized right now, if I was to make a decision to just not continue with home birth, switch over to the medical, go to the ultrasounds every month that they wanted me to, I would be
Hmm.
making that decision out of fear and not
Hmm.
faith. And so I talked to my husband. We decided we're going to continue on and we're not going to get the ultrasounds. We'll get another one at 34 weeks just to see where it's moved. So we ended up getting an ultrasound at 34 weeks and the placenta had moved.
Hmm.
Not enough. Like if I was still in the medical system, they would have still done a C-section. So it was still very, very close to my
Hmm.
cervix, but I had found one study that showed uh, the length that my placenta was away from my cervix, there was still a chance that I would be able to have a home birth. So
Hmm.
we decided if there is any decels in baby or any severe amount of bleeding, anything like that, we would transfer in, and I would know that that C-section was necessary. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was that pregnancy, and it was quite emotional roller coaster for me. But
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can see how you said like everything kind of came to you and everything just kind of happened the way that it was supposed to happen. So that's really cool. And I love what your midwife said too. That is really true to not make decisions out of like a fear state and wait until you actually like are not in that state anymore and you think about things again. Definitely. That's amazing that she gave you that advice.
yeah, yeah, it was awesome.
For that home birth, how did that one end up going forward? Just with like the experience of it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Again, I this was my most redemptive and healing birth because I was still in that kind of trauma state, right? And I had
Hmm.
no proof that my body could work. So I was purely running off of faith of I really hope everything I've learned will pay off, right? And
Yeah.
so I started having contractions early one morning at like 4 in the morning, and I had an appointment that day in the afternoon. So I had my friend come over, we walked around. My midwife came over at 4 in the evening to do my assessment, and she's like, "Yeah, you're probably in labor." At that point, I was about 41 weeks and
Mm-hmm.
3 days. So I was very ready to have
Hmm.
this baby. And she said, we'll stay in town. We'll run a couple of errands and we'll see how you're doing. Well, they come back that later that night, and I was feeling contractions, but it was very much early labor, and it was like I couldn't quite get into that active labor mode. So they said, "Well, go lay down and rest and see how you do." So probably around 9 o'clock at night, I went and laid down and tried to sleep, and I was still getting contractions every like 5 to 10 minutes, but they were very light, very just at this point annoying because I felt like it wasn't doing anything, and I was getting
Hmm.
frustrated because I knew I was in this middle ground. So I came down around 11 o'clock, and they were resting in my living room, and um, I just sat out there and talked, and we talked about my last birth, and it was like I was in this state of openness that I hadn't really been in to spill my heart out of like this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm remembering, and we just kind of spent some time processing that last birth experience. And I'm telling you, within an hour I
Hmm.
went into active labor. So there's such an emotional aspect of labor and of birth that's just profound and
Yeah.
oftentimes overlooked. But from that moment, I realized emotions are so powerful. And I was not feeling in a safe place
Mm-hmm.
to transition yet to have this baby because I was still holding on to fear of what happened last time.
Hmm.
So went into labor, a more active labor, and uh, it was just blissful. I had done so much mindset work behind accepting in each wave. Did more of the hypnobirthing of like changing my words. It's not contractions, they're surges. And
Hmm.
I really just thanked each one that came in because I knew
Hmm.
each wave that was coming in was bringing my baby closer and closer. And I was just in the zone. And so I thought for sure, I'm going to be having a baby really soon, like tonight.
Hmm.
And I got in the pool and I stayed there for a really long time, basically in the same position. And it was like I was going in and out of transition. I would go into transition, we think something is going to happen, and then I would come back out. And so I had my midwife check me, but I said, I don't want to know because I knew there was something still in my brain of I
Hmm.
had only gotten to 4 centimeters with my first birth after 18
Okay.
hours. And so I knew if I was told how far along I am, that would be um that would really get me off of my rhythm that I was in. So she checked me, and I'm so glad she did not tell me because I was only at 5 centimeters after
Mm-hmm.
hours and hours of what I felt like was hard work, but still blissful. Like I was in
Hmm.
a very good rhythm. So, um, she said, "Well, why don't you get out of the pool and change positions?" And, I was laboring all through the night. At one point, I was in bed, and I remember her assistant, who has become one of my closest mentors and friends, she was just rubbing my legs in between as I'm trying to sleep. When a contraction would come, I would moan through it and she would massage my legs. And I just remember thinking, this is how it should be. Like, this
Yeah.
is just wonderful. I've never felt so loved and taken care of in my whole life. And
Hmm.
it was pure bliss.
Hmm.
And so morning came and I was still in a very good mood, but we decided to go on a walk. And it was that walk around the block that changed everything for me. So I think I had gotten so comfortable for hours in the same position in the pool, and I was almost afraid to move that
Yeah.
it wasn't doing anything for me, right? But when I moved and I went for a walk, that sent me into transition. I lost the rest of my mucus plug and bloody show and all of that. And after that, it ramped up. So got back in the pool. And
Hmm.
at one point, my friend told me I was just looking up and smiling. She actually took a picture of it. She said, I said, this is fun. And really, I was having a fun time, which
Hmm.
is so crazy to think back to. But I ended up pushing 2.5 hours,
Hmm.
and baby came. It was a lot of work, but I loved pushing. Baby was born and brought her to my chest, and I threw my head back and just, I did it. It was that moment of it did work. Everything, my body isn't broken. All the culmination of all of these truths that I had been putting into my head came to
Hmm.
fruition, and this baby was on my chest. I wasn't broken. I did it. I did it. And it
Hmm.
was life transforming. I haven't been the
Hmm.
same since.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love that you said like, "Oh, I'm having fun right now." That's really like an awesome part of the story to hear because yeah, birth is so hard and it can be so like so intense and so powerful and something like we've never really experienced before, especially because with your hospital birth, you had all of the interventions. So with your home birth, it's a completely different birth all in itself. So it's like it's your first time again almost. And yeah, just to hear that part of like, even though it can be hard, it can be a lot to overcome, it was still fun. It was still blissful. It was still like all of these amazing things. And then, yes, the reward at the end. Everyone says like you don't get a reward for natural birth, but you really do get such a reward out of just the entire experience and knowing like, wow, I just did that. Like I overcame all of that myself. I am powerful. So
Yeah.
it's really an amazing feeling. And to get like that redemptive and healing birth too, it just warms my heart. I'm so happy to hear that story.
Yes, that birth high is way better than any trophy I could ever be given. So,
Hmm. Yeah, that's amazing. And I know you've had two more home births after that. So do you want to kind of touch on those ones as well and share those stories?
yeah, sure. So, a big lesson that I learned for any of you listening out there who have had a home birth and you did all the preparation and you're planning another home birth, keep up with the preparation because it's really easy to kind of fall off the track of that state of mind that is really beneficial for labor. So, like I had said with my first birth, I was really, really intentional with what I listened to and everything. And I became a birth worker, so I started attending births. And anytime you attend a birth, they leave a mark on you. And at this time, I was attending hospital births, and there was a lot of things that happened that just I didn't probably fully process. Also,
Mm-hmm.
it was during 2020 I got pregnant,
Mm.
and it was a rocky time, as I'm sure most people would understand. But it was a rocky time. I was still working as a nurse. There was a lot of yeah, just chaos kind of in my marriage. And so it felt like I was on uneven ground and I was under a lot of stress. And so the birth was kind of the last thing I was thinking about. So
Mm-hmm.
when I entered into labor, I was in a really grouchy state. And this was
Mm.
very different than my first one where I was like, yes, I'm finally pregnant and or I'm finally in labor and I'm happy and
Yeah.
surrounded by love and joy. This one was like, okay, let's just like grin and bear it. I
Mm.
also went into this labor thinking, I want to know that I'm strong enough to handle whatever sensations come my way. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
the first birth, I went into it thinking, I want to enjoy and welcome each one in. So, again, your
Mm-hmm.
intention really does matter going in.
Yeah.
So, I just wanted to prove to myself that I could get through hard things. And that's what I did. I muscled through every single one of those contractions. I
Mm-hmm.
actually had COVID during my labor. And so
Mm.
here I am, coughing and snotty nose and sore throat. And I'm in labor and I don't really like people. And I was just in a grouchy state, but I was doing the labor thing. So I should back up 2 days before. I went into labor. I had taken a nap and I woke up to a gush of blood. And I
Mm.
thought it was my water breaking, but it was actually a pretty significant gush of blood. So I got up. I was in this state of panic, right? Of like, oh my gosh, this is probably like a placental abruption. And again, I'm gonna have a C-section. And all of these things went rushing through my mind. Well, we checked on baby and I calmed down. Again, I learned don't make decisions out of fear. Like
Mm-hmm.
let the moment pass, assess, tune into your intuition, and go from there. Well, we tuned into baby, tuned into myself, bleeding stopped, and I felt like I'm safe. My baby is safe. We are okay. So we continued on. 2 days later, that's when I went into labor.
Mm.
And so, uh, really her labor was fairly straightforward. Again, I just had kind of a hard time getting into that active labor. So I called everybody over kind of way too soon because I thought second home birth, this is bound to go faster than my first, right? My first
Mm-hmm.
one ended up being 26 hours of labor. And I
Mm.
should note too, I she was over a pound bigger than her sister. So that doctor
Okay.
was dead wrong. I can deliver a baby that is bigger than
Mm-hmm.
my first. So I was, yeah, going through each contraction because I invited people over too long and I was still in that very like logical brain. I couldn't switch over to that active labor. So
Mm-hmm.
my dear friend who is so wise, she came, she's like, go lay down, go rest. We'll stay down here. And I remember her coming up. It was about lunchtime. And she got really, really close to my face and she said, Aly, do you need us to leave? And I just said, I think so. And I just was
Mm.
kind of teary. And she's like, okay, we're gonna leave and we will take care of ourselves. Don't you worry about it. When you are ready to have us back over, just call and we'll be here. She said, go have fun with your husband. Go do something. So I had somebody take my two girls and they left and it was just my husband and we ended up watching a funny chick flick and eating Panera. And I was just in between bites of Panera and contractions. Like I'd have a contraction and then I'd eat another bite and laugh to the movie. And it was just a sweet time. And it was the time that I needed to just be. And I didn't feel the pressure of making it go faster. I was just enjoying it.
Hmm.
And at one point, we thought, it's been a while. Let's call the chiropractor over. So I had the chiropractor come and she adjusted me on my hands and knees. I had a contraction. I was on my hands and knees. I said, "Do I have to move?" She's like, "No, I'll just adjust you here. No worries."
Hmm.
So she adjusted me, and right after, I had the most intense, effective contraction. And she said, "I bet you'll have a baby in about 5 hours." Um, and I said, "Okay, that'd be great." Well, it's true. About 5 hours later, I had really, really progressed to the point where I had called the team back over and I was sitting on a birth stool and I remember feeling down there and I'm like, I feel so swollen. Like, I don't know what's going on. I just kind of feel off. I was getting a really bad pinching pain on my C-section scar. And so
Hmm.
part of me, still in my doula nurse brain, was trying to assess myself, which is not a
Yeah.
good thing to do during labor, but I was trying to assess myself. And so I was afraid to say anything, so I kind of muscled through it for a while. And till I looked up at my friend and I said, I don't know what should I do?" And she said, "Well, I mean, I can check you if you want." And I was dead against cervical checks. I'm like, "No, I don't need that." But at this point, I was like, well, maybe if it'll give us some sort of information for me to hold on to, then it will be worth it. So I laid down and um she felt for the cervix and she said, "Well, there's a little bit of a cervix left over the head." And some might call that a cervical lip, right? But she
Hmm.
is so wise and so gentle and kind. And she, after talking to so many people, cervical lips are oftentimes the most painful thing to like get over the head, right?
Hmm.
And so I was thinking, oh no, I'm embracing and kind of clenching for this pain. She said she just all she did was place her fingers on the lip and say, "You're melting away. Baby is coming down. It's going away. It's melting away." She just touched it and told it what to do. And in that moment, the baby's head dropped through my pelvis. My water
Wow.
broke. I had felt like this kick, and my water exploded everywhere. I jumped out of bed. It was so dramatic. I jumped out of bed and I just felt her fall to my perineum. And I just sat there hanging over my bed, hand on her head, thinking, how did that just happen in a matter of 2 minutes? So
Yeah.
I sat there and just waited and breathed, and I felt her come down without me pushing. I don't remember really. I pushed maybe one time, but my body was just doing everything it needed to do, and it was the coolest feeling ever. And
Yeah.
she was born right into my hands. I pulled her up onto my chest, and I had a birth pause where I just was kind of stunned of what just happened, and then this realization that I have a baby. And
Hmm.
she's here and she's safe, and it was wonderful. And so while I did learn the lesson that your mindset really does matter and your intentions you set for birth does matter. It was still a wonderful birth experience and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah. That's amazing. Um, was this your midwife who did that or the birth assistant who did or for like the cervical lip?
Yeah, so I actually had the first midwife that I had. I didn't hire her again. I
Okay.
had her birth assistant ended up being one of my close friends and
Hmm.
mentors. So it was, she had come over and she had
Okay.
helped me. Yeah.
Okay. That's awesome. I love that.
Mhm.
That sounds very just so like I don't even know how to explain it. Just the reassurance that she gave you of like nothing's wrong. This is just what's going to happen. This is what your body is going to just naturally do. And then within like that short period of time, it just did it. That's really amazing to hear. I love that part.
Yeah, things can happen really fast in labor, and that's
Hmm.
why I think cervical checks typically are pointless, right? Because you could be 5 centimeters and then in an hour have a baby. So
Hmm.
really, we weren't checking for that. We were more of looking for position and understanding, like, why are you having such intense pinching pain during each contraction? So, the
Yeah.
pinching pain was not from my scar ripping open, right?
Hmm.
It was just from a little bit of cervix and the position of the baby's head. So.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. For your third birth, was that one different for like planning and going into it now that you said you figured out that like you still need to work on your mindset and do all of that work before the birth, even though you've already done it before with previous ones? How did that journey look?
Yeah, so at this one, I think being older too, and then being around so many women who have birthed or are preparing to birth, I knew I wanted to just fully have that responsibility over my decisions. And it was such a beautiful pregnancy. I knew my last pregnancy was really rough emotionally and just getting through the crazy time in life. And this time I wanted to protect my space. So I ended up doing all of my prenatal care, having a total, wild pregnancy. And it was
Hmm.
amazing. It was
Hmm.
so blissful and
Yeah.
peaceful. I never felt rushed. I felt so in tune with my baby, and I just enjoyed the heck out of every single day that I was
Hmm.
pregnant. And I was actually the sickest with him, but
Hmm.
I just held his pregnancy with such gratitude. And also, I thought, well, this could be our last baby. So I really just want to embrace it with everything that I have. Um,
Hmm.
so I felt extremely empowered and peaceful going into this birth. I was actually pregnant with him almost 42 weeks, so he was my longest one that I was pregnant for. And I remember at one point thinking, I'd never worried about going past due. That was just not something that had ever really come into my mind. But when I hit 41 weeks and 5 days, 6 days, I thought, I wonder what my plan is. Like, do I have a plan?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
because right now I've just been enjoying and trusting and tuning in. And so I just kept thinking, well, that's what I'll continue to do. Well, on the night of 41 weeks and 6 days, so I was going into the 42nd week, I started having really severe leg pain and I got a fever and I was feeling very sick again. Um,
Hmm.
so that kind of takes you back to my second birth, my first home birth.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, I just can't believe I have a fever, body aches, and just not doing too good right before going into labor. Like, that's not
Yeah.
ideal. But I didn't realize that the leg pain that I was having wasn't just like body aches, it was actually early labor.
Hmm.
And so my husband worked until about midnight or 1 in the morning, and it was my birthday on the next day. So my mom had come over, helped me with the kids while I was laying on the couch, and we watched a funny movie together. And I didn't go to bed until midnight, so the going into my birthday.
Hmm.
And my husband came home, fell asleep, and I thought, man, I really hope I don't have a baby. Like, one, I don't feel good, and two, it's my birthday.
Yeah.
Well, 2 hours later, I wake up and I'm like, it's 2 in the morning, definitely having contractions. And for a while, I just hummed through them and I sang and I laid on my left side and I just hung out, wondering how long can I experience this without needing to get out of bed. So that probably lasted an hour. Then I got up and took a shower and thought, there's no way I'm having a baby on my birthday. And so I, after the shower, went and woke my husband up and I said, yeah, I think you might need to set up the pool. I'm pretty sure I'm in labor.
Hmm.
So I had learned my lesson and I didn't call anybody over right away. Thankfully, I didn't know I had been in early labor. I really enjoy having people there supporting me. And
Yeah.
the people that have been supporting me have been my close friends and birth workers that I've been working with and helping other people with. So it's a very tight-knit community feeling for birth.
Hmm.
And I love it. So he goes to fill up the pool. We realize the liner doesn't fit. And
Mm.
so I'm not going to be getting the water birth that I thought I was going to get in front of my
Hmm.
fireplace in January. I thought, oh, that seems so romantic. But
Hmm.
things had to change. And I was like, that's okay. And I just rolled with it. And it didn't really take me too off guard, which was surprising, but also I think I knew intuitively I just needed to cocoon in my room. Like I
Mm.
needed to be in that safe, enclosed space. So the living room felt too big to me. And so we ended up calling over my friends probably at like 5 or 6 in the morning. And I was in active labor by that point, and I was moaning through them, and I was holding my birth like comb and really I was really doing good, and I had prayed this time that I only had like a 10-hour labor, so like 10 to 12 I think I would be okay. My last one was 18 hours, so that was my shortest
Mm.
one up until that point, and I
Yeah.
just wanted it a little bit shorter because I didn't want to be exhausted.
Hmm.
And so I was at one point when they first got over to the house, I remember saying, "Oh, I can't do this for 10 more hours," because by that time it had probably been about 8. And they're like, "You're doing great. You're doing it, right?" And so this labor felt a little weird because I couldn't get into a rhythm. And it wasn't
Hmm.
necessarily like my mindset was wrong or off or anything like that. It was just I couldn't quite feel where he was. And I
Mm.
felt a little disconnected and confused. And I couldn't get into a rhythm. And I would have a labor that goes boom, 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 contraction, and then like a huge long pause. And so at one point we were like, well, let's just try some different movements. Maybe he's in a funky position. So at one
Hmm.
point, a position was suggested to me where uh, it was like an abdominal lift and tuck, right? And I would lift
Hmm.
and tuck and lean backwards on my husband. And I remember doing it and thinking that felt terrible. Like, I am not doing that again. And I
Yeah.
verbalized that out loud. I am not doing that again. And so I had a friend check the heartbeat and it was down to the 80s. So he had a major decel. And to me, that was like, wow, my intuition told me that was not a good position. And the baby said, that's not a good position. Don't do that again. So
Yeah.
we avoided that. We thought through, okay, something is just a little off, but we're just gonna watch and wait. And, if there's another massive decel like that, we'll kind of think through our next steps. So I,
Hmm.
at that point, shifted into I'm just going to do whatever I need to do to tune into him, right? And so that looked like a lot of laboring on the toilet
Hmm.
and just being extremely patient.
Mm.
And at one point, I remember looking up at my friend and just being like, I don't know what's happening. Like, I don't know what's going on. I don't feel him anywhere. I, I just, I can't, I can't do it. Like, it felt like I really can't do it. So
Hmm.
she was like, well, and I said, can you check me? And I'm like, what? I hate cervical checks. Like, why am I asking? She's like, are you like, do you really? I was like, no, but also, can you? I just wanted like something to hold on to. And it was so weird, but also at the same time, I'm like, hey, I'm not gonna be legalistic about it. And she checked and I was complete, but he was just kind of in a funny position. So she's like, you're doing great. I mean, keep keep going. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep going. So I got into hands and knees and I got back on the toilet. I think I did spend the majority of the time sitting on the toilet. My water finally broke on the toilet, and I was thinking he's gonna finally come down. And no, I had to really work at it. So I practiced pushing and I just was experimenting with would this feel good even. So I pushed for a little while and it felt better, but not great. So it was a little discouraging because at one point I'm like, I'm tired and this kind of hurts. And
Yeah.
I don't know where he is and I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And I just felt very lost. And
Hmm.
it wasn't a great encouraging story. So I was kind of bummed out that it wasn't like my amazing, beautiful, blissful birth. It was like hard
Yeah.
work, right?
Hmm.
And at one point, I was like, okay, I think I feel him kind of coming down more. So I leaned over my bed and I kind of like, I don't know, this is just who I am, maybe. I really like to get into like a deep sumo squat and leaning over the end of my bed. To me, it feels
Hmm.
so grounding. I can reach down and I can feel their heads coming out. So this is a very common position for me. And I would push, 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 and I eventually felt his head and then it stopped. And I remember thinking, wow, why is he not coming out? Like, this is hard. And
Hmm.
at that point, my friend was like, Ollie, I need you to get into a runner's lunge. And I knew, I mean, again, I've been to plenty of births and I know every time we suggest a runner's lunge to a mom, it's because baby needs a little bit more space to come out, right? So I get
Yeah.
into a runner's lunge and she she did have to reach in there and kind of like wiggle his shoulders. And later on, she told me usually it's one shoulder or the other that I can kind of move and wiggle, but both were just really, really kind of stuck. And so he came out, his head was so purple, and his cord was wrapped around his neck, and then kind of a sash around his shoulder and belly.
Hmm.
And really quickly after that, the placenta was born. So after processing this birth, I was really thankful that I went to 42 weeks because in that time, he had a very long cord. In that time, he was able to wrap himself up and protect himself from that cord prolapse. And so our bodies are so amazing. Our babies are so amazing. But
Hmm.
I think that's why I felt a little disconnected and out of rhythm is because my body
Mm.
knew you can't push so hard. We gotta wait until that placenta is also ready. So because baby is like all wrapped up. So
Yeah.
as soon as he was born, the placenta came really quickly after. And um
Wow.
I did give him like I just whispered in his face and kind of woke him up and just breathed a little breath into his mouth and it was just precious and I talked to him and I had three girls and he was my boy born on my
Mm.
birthday and it was just beautiful and I was just elated that I
Yeah.
had this sweet little baby and that I did it. So
Hmm.
each story was so different, but I have gained a lesson through each one of them, and I'm so
Hmm.
thankful for each gift that they are to me.
Yeah, definitely. And they're all so beautiful and amazing in their own ways. It was so special hearing all of those stories. So thank you for sharing all of those.
Yeah, thank you for letting me.
Of course. And you've mentioned a few times that you've gone into birth work during this time of having babies yourself, and you've had this close kind of group of birth workers and friends and a mentor who has helped you. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that and your journey in birth work?
Yeah, it's been quite the journey because I at first had no idea what a doula was, right? So,
Hmm.
I did go through a doula training and it was great. I started attending births in person. After I started having children, though, I realized It's really hard to be a solo doula and
Hmm.
have children. So I got a team member, and that was wonderful. We had a great ride, and I had another baby. And so I took some time off, and I realized I really love teaching other women about how they were designed to birth. Because I
Hmm.
know for me, learning that all of the stuff on physiological birth and just the design of birth, that's what gave me so much trust in the process because I
Yeah.
realized I am made for that. So I transitioned online, and now I have a group program where women can come in, typically first time home birth moms can come in and learn how to have a home birth, and
Mm.
prepare themselves with that. So it's been so amazing to be able to transition online and help women there. But in person, we hold monthly birth circles, me and my very close friend who's attended all my births and I hers.
Yeah.
We host a monthly group, and we have about 20 people come each month, and just share stories with one another. We do different trainings, and it's been an amazing time, especially in our state where home birth is perceived to be illegal. We've all found
Yeah.
each other, and it just shows the power of when women gather. Like
Hmm.
there's so many possibilities, and there's so much support and love, and um, yeah, it's just I love gathering with women and teaching women, and it's been amazing. So,
Hmm. Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. Where can people find you if they're interested in either your like group coaching that you have or just finding you locally? Where can they kind of look you up at?
yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Peaceful Homebirth. Come listen to my podcast, Peaceful Homebirth Podcast. That's on Apple, Spotify, or Stitcher. And I live in Nebraska. So go over to Instagram, DM me if you want more information about joining a group or starting your own, and we'd be happy to start guiding you in that. So yeah, that's where I can be found.
Yeah, amazing. And I'll leave all the links down below for anyone who wants to go ahead and find you, and they could easily just access those there. But again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of these amazing stories with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
As a doula and birth keeper, I serve women who want to have a physiological and intuitive birth. Women who are ready to take radical responsibility for their birth and want to be the authority in their birth. This is not a job or career for me. This is much bigger, something deeper. This is soul work, my ultimate passion, because I trust women and I trust birth. I have both in-person and virtual offerings available, including birth services, birth circles, courses, mentorships, freebies, and much more. For more information on everything that I offer, the link is down below in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd love for you to share with any family or friends who may benefit from these stories and experiences. To further support this podcast, I'd appreciate if you would leave a 5-star rating and review, or you can even make a loving donation on my website at birthsathome.com/products/podcast-donation. Tune in next week for another home birth story.